Good afternoon. We are Team 5 and we will be discussing about an institutional logic approach to social entrepreneurship, market logic, religious diversity, and resource acquisition by microfinance organizations. Resource acquisition is critically important for social ventures to fulfill their social missions while striving to scale up and become financially sustainable. Past studies have only just begun to appreciate how institutional forces shape the acquisition of resources by social ventures. Grounded in the context of microfinance organizations, a particular type of social venture that holds promise for addressing poverty in developing nations, this paper examines how institutional logics related to market and religion shape the nature and amount of capital acquired by MFOs. In particular, we study how the market logic and religious diversity independently and jointly affect flows of commercial and public capital into MFOs across countries. There is growing worldwide interest in entrepreneurship as a means for addressing social issues while creating economic wealth. In particular, social entrepreneurship has been recognized by both scholars and practitioners as a powerful mechanism to address poverty, reduce unemployment, confront climate change, empower women, rebuild disaster-inflicted communities, and the like. Befitting this promise, social ventures have burgeoned around the world, especially in emerging and underdeveloped economies where many of the world's most intractable problems persist. Despite the spread of social ventures around the world, success stories are still exceptions, and most social ventures face a variety of operating challenges, wrestle with real trade offs in balancing financial and social objectives, and are vulnerable to organizational decline. In addition, social ventures are encouraged to become financially self sustainable so as to reduce the reliance on government support or subsidies that are oftentimes limited and unstable. Various characteristics and capabilities of social entrepreneurs have been considered critical in resource acquisition, such as imagination and judgment, social skills, identities, compassion, social capital, narrative, storytelling, and bricolage. The omission of religious logics in social entrepreneurship scholarship is particularly noteworthy. This is because religious beliefs often underpin the founding and operation of social enterprises, and they have been shown to strongly influence important social outcomes such as poverty and inequality. In this paper, we draw on recent developments in social entrepreneurship and institutional logic literature and highlight the value of attending to both the nature of resource providers and the societal level institutional context in studying social venture resource acquisition. In particular, we examine how two kinds of institutional logics related to market and religion independently and jointly shape microfinance organization capital acquisition from two different types of funders, commercial and public. Commercial and public capital are two primary types of financial resources relied upon in microfinance, with the former focused more on financial returns and the latter more on developmental objectives. Our goal is to understand how market and religious logics and their interaction shape the flow of commercial versus public resource capital to microfinance organizations, and relatedly, the status of the privatization of state development efforts in microfinance sector. By focusing on both the nature of resource providers and the impact of societal level institutional logics, our paper aims to contribute to a more comprehensive and comparative understanding of resource acquisition by social ventures across nations, enabling more effective transactional replication and transplant of successful social venture models. An institutional logics approach to social entrepreneurship. The nature of social venture means that the challenges and difficulties they encounter in acquiring resources might be even more salient and complex. For instance, many social ventures operate in developing economies where quality resources are scarce and supporting economic and political infrastructures for channeling resource flows are weak. This is further exacerbated by the fact that social ventures often need to balance their social missions and financial performance, further muddling the unpredictable nature of returns to potential investors. In light of these challenges, increasing research has been dedicated to examining how social entrepreneurs can successfully mobilize their identities and skills to overcome resource acquisition barriers. Maguire et al. Argue that it is not just social entrepreneur identities that matter in initiating fundamental changes, but also their structural position in a field that enable them to bridge diverse stakeholders and access dispersed set of resources. Barron and Markman argued that beyond relational and structural connections, social entrepreneurs may further increase their success in gaining resources if they have stronger social skills, specific competencies that help them interact effectively with resource providers. These skills include the ability to read resource providers' intentions accurately, make favorable first impressions, and adapt to a wide range of social situations. In a similar vein, both Rewbottom and Waldron identified a number of rhetorical strategies that social entrepreneurs can engage in order to successfully acquire resources. Ellison have further suggested that by carefully managing entrepreneurial narratives, social entrepreneurs can more quickly receive funding. Despite the insights generated by these prior studies, two important omissions have limited our understanding of resource acquisition process. First, while resource acquisition necessarily involves two parties, acquirers and providers, existing research has primarily taken the resource acquirer's perspective and neglected the role of different resource providers in resource acquisition process. Recent studies have started to examine how different types of resource providers may have different values and expectations and thus favor investment targets that are most likely to help them achieve their missions. Another omission is the extant literature on resource acquisition by social ventures is its lack of an analytic approach that is large scale and comparative. Past studies have focused primarily on individual entrepreneurs working in a single country setting and in various cases portrayed those individuals as heroic figures changing the world. While this approach allows deep dives into particular social problem under study, over-reliance or iconic individual stories may limit the insights one can draw across contexts. Therefore, bringing in a cross national comparative approach to social entrepreneurship research is valuable for understanding the various institutional conditions under which social ventures emerge, operate, and perform. To this end, we believe that it is particularly fruitful to engage recent developments associated with the institutional logics perspective, which have importantly shifted attention away from study of isomorphism and cultural homogeneity to embrace a much more multiplex understanding of societal level differences rooted in various configurations of cultural beliefs and practices. Developing an institutional logics approach to social entrepreneurship is particularly valuable for extending recent efforts in theorizing the complex institutional context of social entrepreneurship. This is consistent with the overall trend of entrepreneurship research, which has started to pay more attention to the role of different types of institutions. Research on the role of institutions in social venture resource acquisition is even more nascent. Some of the most notable studies in this area have primarily focused on institutional order of the state. For instance, Alt and Spicer examined how state fragility shapes the commercial funding of MFOs. According to Alt and Spicer, in a fragile state, the inability of the government to maintain a monopoly over the use of violence leads to high levels of conflict and instability in political and economic life, and the lack of basic bureaucratic capacities to effectively implement rules, regulations, or program leads to a fundamental disregard for the rule of law and a lack of public services. Compared with the institutional order of the state, other institutional orders such as religion might be equally influential in social venture resource acquisition. This is because different religious affiliations and beliefs may lead to heterogeneous sets of opportunities and obstacles that variably influence education attainment, fertility, and female labor force participation, all of which contribute to reduction of or perpetuation of poverty. As such, social ventures that aim to address poverty will need to attend to the various logics of religion. The institutional logics perspective thus characterizes nation states as constituted by configurations of heterogeneous logics that cooperate and conflict with significantly departs from previous comparative institutional approaches such as varieties of capitalism that tends to emphasize the complementarity and coherence across economic and political institutions but downplay heterogeneity within nations and background, the importance of cultural forces. Microfinance capital acquisition. In the past decades, microfinance has gained increasing attention so as innovative financial tool that promises to solve the chronic problem of poverty that still persists in the developing world. Microfinance is thus vital for providing capital access to the poor who are typically neglected by traditional lenders such as commercial banks. In spite of the potential benefits MFOs bring to the poor, they face significant difficulties in their operations and the fulfillment of their social missions through commercial means is challenging. The World Bank recently reported that only in 8 countries do microfinance borrowers account for greater than 2% of the population, Moreover, the same report revealed that among a sample of 124 major MFOs in 49 countries, less than half were profitable and self sustainable. Since MFOs only just started to offer deposits and other related financial services, they have difficulty in amassing a meaningful capital base through internal sources. Among various types of external funding, debt financing is the most prominent, outpacing other funding forms such as grants and equity. Traditionally, MFOs, especially in their early stages of development, rely on public debt to cover startup costs, establish infrastructure, and build capacity. Over time, as MFOs mature, they often seek more capital to finance their portfolio growth, expanded outreach, development of new products and channels, as well as entry into new markets and regions. Commercial and public funders constitute the two primary types of capital sources for MFOs, jointly accounting for about 97% of all loans borrowed by MFOs. The remaining 3% of MFO's debt funding comes from charitable sources such as foundations, non government organizations, and individual or peer to peer lenders. In this paper, we focus on commercial and public capital acquired by MFO since they are the predominant capital sources in microfinance. Commercial and public funders tend to have different motives and expectations in funding MFOs. Public funders typically have a philanthropic or developmental orientation. They are publicly accountable for the use of their funds and consider microfinance as a tool to achieve social goals such as poverty alleviation, financial inclusion, women's empowerment, children's health, and broader economic and societal development. As one public funder stated in its mission statement, its goal is to have a focused approach to the development of the micro enterprise sector by providing the critical inputs necessary for growth and sustainability. To this end, public funders offer subsidized loans to MFOs, often with attractive terms. Compared with public funders, commercial funders care more about financial returns and private interests drive funding decisions, although some of them may also simultaneously attend to social outcomes. Commercial funders thus consider microfinance more as an opportunity to diversify their investment portfolio and earn profits. The market logic and MFO capital acquisition. The prevalence of market logic is a worldwide phenomenon linked to the rise of neoliberal thought, privatization of industry and capital markets, and the general restructuring of socio-economic life. Thus, the market logic can be understood as an institution comprising a core set of ideas, practices, and policy prescriptions that protect the liberty of individuals to pursue their economic interests and embrace free market solutions to economic and social problems. The market logic is believed to contribute to economic and social prosperity with minimal government coercion and constraint, free movement of labor and goods, and absolute right of property ownership. The existence of a fully elaborated market logic is particularly important in microfinance because it encourages both domestic and international capital flows, potentially alleviating capital constraints faced by MFOs. Reflecting this, arguments about how to best foster the development of MFOs in a country have focused primarily on implementation of neoliberal economic policies. Countries with a stronger market logic impose fewer constraints on the flow of capital investment. In addition, a stronger market logic may also help reduce transaction costs, facilitate business formation and trade, and promote entrepreneurship. With individual property rights protected and the rule of law strengthened, private enterprises and entrepreneurial initiatives can flourish as key paths to individual success, innovation, and wealth creation, which in turn help attract investors. Furthermore, more lenient labor regulations, less corruption, strong infrastructure, and a state polity are often associated with a stronger market logic and can also provide a favorable investment environment and ensure the rights of funders. Accordingly, we expect that a stronger market logic will encourage inflows of capital of both public and commercial nature into a country's microfinance organization. Hypothesis 1a states that the strength of the market logic in a country will be positively associated with the amount of commercial capital required by MFOs in that country. Hypothesis 1b states that the strength of the market logic in a country will be positively associated with the amount of public capital acquired by MFOs in that country. In general, commercial funders appreciate microfinance more as an investment opportunity than developmental tool. Even if commercial funders have a strong social orientation, they may still be more likely to put money into MFOs operating in countries with a stronger market logic. In such countries, financial returns are less uncertain or risky. Conversely, public funders may have a different mandate and focus on achieving developmental goals despite the potential costs and risks they may bear in countries with less favorable market conditions. Given these differences, we predict hypothesis 2. The strength of the market logic in a country will be more positively associated with the amount of commercial capital than the amount of public capital acquired by MFOs. Religious logics and MFO capital acquisition. From an institutional logics perspective, the market logic is more appropriately analyzed in the context of other key institutional logics in a country. That is, the effects of the market logic can be enhanced or attenuated based on how they are configured with other institutional logics. In situations where there are multiple competing or incompatible logics, institutional complexity is created for organizations, leading to a more ambiguity and uncertainty with respect to assessing costs and benefits. Indeed, certain institutions, just such as religion, might erect significant barriers to the pursuit of MFO social goals with commercial means, implying an institutional complexity due to the coexistence of market and religious. Past studies have suggested that religious diversity, the existence of multiple religious logics, may play an important role shaping investors' funding decisions. Robust evidence exists demonstrating that religious diversity has a significant influence on intergroup dynamics. It has been shown to lead to discrimination and domination of minority groups, intergroup antagonism, reduced intergroup communication and trust, and lack of public good provision and wealth distribution. Different culture beliefs and social networks put up barriers for people from different religious groups to read each other's intentions and assess each other's trustworthiness. Resonating with these arguments, a recent study found that within country, diversity of religion is an important source of behavioral uncertainty and information asymmetry in a foreign firm's evaluation of an acquisition target in that country. Successful microfinance lending transactions require mutual understanding and collaboration between loan officers and end borrowers. Loan officers and poor clients generally come from different social groups. This is especially true in countries where there is high religious diversity. Overall, in countries with multiple religious logics that generate high religious diversity, we expect that MFOs face more difficult operating challenges, including barriers to fulfill their financial and social missions. This will deter funders from entering the market and investing in microfinance. Indeed, past studies have suggested that lower levels of trust between clients and loan officers from different religious backgrounds contribute to higher operating costs, lower repayment rates, and more defaults. While religious diversity tends to decrease the amount of capital acquired by MFOs from both commercial and public sources, we also expect public funders, given their mandate and objective of being developmental, to be more resilient in funding MFOs despite the operating challenges and lower financial returns in highly religiously diverse countries. Accordingly, we predict hypothesis 3A. The religious diversity of a country is negatively associated with the amount of commercial capital acquired by MFOs in that country. Hypothesis 3b. The religious diversity of a country is negatively associated with the amount of public capital acquired by MFOs in that country. Hypothesis 4. The religious diversity has a less negative impact on the amount of public capital than the amount of commercial capital acquired by MFOs. The joint influence of market and religious logics. Beyond the independent negative effect of religious diversity on MFO capital acquisition, we also expect that religious diversity may mitigate the positive influence of the market logic on capital inflows into microfinance. The effect of market logic has been theorized to operate through two mechanisms: capital supply and efficient capital allocation, which are thought to work in tandem to enable resource flows. While a stronger market logic in general facilitates capital supply into a nation, the efficient allocation of capital may tend to push capital flow into the most financially worthy organizations in that nation. When religious diversity creates barrier to MFO operations and challenges their financial and social performance prospects, capital investments may be diverted away from the microfinance sector. Therefore, we expect hypothesis 5. Religious diversity will mitigate the positive impact of market logic on the amount of capital acquired by MFOs, particularly from commercial sources.
Our primary data source is the Microfinance Information Exchange (MIX). The MIX is a non-profit organization that acts as a business information provider in the microfinance sector, with the goal of promoting financial transparency in the industry, building information infrastructure in developing countries, and offering those involved in microfinance, practitioners, funders, policymakers, a way to gain a better understanding of MFO operations, challenges, and performance trends. It, its data has been considered objective and comparable across nations and widely used in past scholarly work on microfinance. As a part of its data collection effort, the MIX began to systematically track MFO funding data starting from 2004. For each lending transaction, the MIX records the funder's name, type, country of origin, and amount of capital lent to an MFO in US dollars. Since the majority of funders are either commercial or public types, we focused on the two primary categories of funders in our analysis. Our data set for the analysis of this paper consists of 891 MFOs, 244 public funders, and 990 commercial funders. Public funders account for around 25% of the loans provided to the MFOs. 72% of the loans are accounted to commercial funders, and the remaining insignificant 3% of the loans come from charitable funders, which is not primary focus in this paper. Based on our theoretical predictions, we constructed two outcome variables, commercial and public capital, that respectively capture the amount of capital acquired by a focal MFO from commercial and public funders in a specific year. For those MFOs that did not receive any loan from either a commercial or public funder, we set the value of both outcome variables to 1 prior to the log transformation. We have two key independent variables, market logic and religious diversity. Following the literature, we capture a country's market logic by the strength of market supporting institutions. It is measured by an average of 5 items developed as part of the Heritage Foundation's Index of Economic Freedom: business freedom, trade freedom, property rights, investment freedom, and financial freedom. The variable constructed based on these 5 items focuses on measuring institutions that support market efficiency and is thus consistent with how the institutional logic's perspective has conceptualized the market logic. Statistically, the market logic of a country ranges between 0 and 100, with a higher score reflecting a stronger and healthier business environment and a more favorable investment climate. We capture the country's level of religious diversity using a variable which has been used and tested extensively in the literature. Through a painstaking data gathering effort covering various cross national data sources. Mm, Using these data, they constructed a variable that captures the religious heterogeneity of a nation or the prevalence of multiple religious logics. The religious diversity variable was computed as 1 minus the Herfindahl index of religious group shares and reflected the probability that two randomly selected individuals of a nation belong to two different religious groups. At the national GDP level, the GDP per capita represents the overall wealth of a nation and may influence capital investments in the microfinance sector. In addition, other forms of aid received by a country may affect the level of capital investment in microfinance. So, we control for net official development assistance as a percentage of gross national income. We also control for the potential influence of ethnic and linguistic diversity of a nation. As part of the same project, in which they collected data on religious diversity, it also gathered data on ethnic and linguistic diversities covering 650 distinct ethnic groups and 1055 major linguistic groups across 200 countries. To isolate the influences of market and religious logics and make sure we captured their distinct effect on MFO funding above and beyond the influence of the state logic, we control for the strength of a state. At the industry level, we included two variables measuring the composition of a country's microfinance sector that might affect a focal MFO's capital acquisition. To control for sector size and growth, we included the number of active MFOs as well as the number of new MFOs founded per country year. We also included a number of MFO level controls. MFO age is calculated by counting the years since the founding of an MFO. MFO size is a factor score based on confirmatory factor analysis of three size indicators: an MFO's number of employees, total assets, and number of offices. We also control for whether an MFO is a non-profit. In addition, we measured an MFO's efficiency by number of borrowers served per loan officer. To control for the possibility that more efficient MFOs attract more capital investment, we control for MFO's transparency by a factor score based on a confirmatory factor analysis of two indicators: the Diamond score, which is a 5-point rating scale evaluating the transparency and quality of MFO's financial reporting, and a regulated dummy indicating whether an MFO is regulated by a state banking supervisory agency. We control for MFO sustainability by factor score based on a confirmatory factor analysis of an MFO's return on assets, operational self-sufficiency. Statistics and correlation matrix of key variables are mentioned in the table. Variance inflation factor analysis was done to confirm multicollinearity concerns in our analysis. In this table, we report the results of SUR analysis about the amount of commercial and public capital that was acquired by MFOs. From these results, we have seen that bigger, more transparent, and more sustainable MFOs seem to have more commercial capital. Countries with higher GDPA also tend to have more commercial capital. Non-profit MFOs on average seem to acquire less capital of both a commercial and public nature compared with for-profit MFOs. This is all from Model 1, which includes only control variables. Model 2. This has market logic variable, and with this, we can find the country market logic, which has a positive impact on both commercial and public capital, which is consistent with hypothesis 1A and 1B. The difference between coefficients of market logic in commercial and public equations is statistically significant. Market logic seems to have more impact on public capital, which thus rejects hypothesis 2. While these results were not something we expected, it is consistent with the view that strong market logics go hand in hand with robust policy and public fundings for supporting a country's social ventures. Model 3 includes religious diversity variable. Religious diversity significantly reduces the amount of commercial capital acquired but does not affect the amount of public capital supporting both hypothesis 3A, 4, and rejecting 3B. Model 4 Model 4 includes both market logic and religious diversity, which is consistent with the hypothesis 5. Religious diversity simply mitigates the positive impact of market logic on both commercial and public capital acquired by MFOs. The difference between the interaction coefficient is not statistically significant. So, even if a country has strong, well developed market logic, existence of multiple religious logics may deter the flow of commercial and public capital in MFOs. Robustness check. A robustness check was also done estimating the commercial and public capital respectively. Results based on regression and are consistent with those mentioned in the paper. Systematic differences were explored, and it was found that in Model 1 and 2, stronger market logic facilitated capital acquisition, both commercial and public, by both for-profit and non-profit MFOs. Results from Model 3 and 4 suggest that the religious diversity seems to decrease commercial capital acquired by for-profit MFOs, but marginally increases public capital acquired by non-profit MFOs. Model 5 and 6 states that countries with strong market logic and religious diversity capital flows primarily into for-profit, whereas public is more inclined towards non-profit MFOs. A dummy variable is created, MNE, multinational enterprise, to control for potential impact such global operation may have on subsidiary MFO acquisition of capital. A measure of microfinance industry concentration of each nation was included. This variable captures the degree of consolidation of the microfinance sector, which may affect capital flow to the focal MFO. Past research suggests that cross-country difference may affect microfinance funding flows. To account for these, three factors were controlled: economic, financial, and political. The paper discusses about social ventures, which have emerged as an important tool for combating some of the world's most chronic and wicked problems. Resource constraints represents one key barrier to success and sustainability of social ventures. The paper focused on microfinance industry and examined how two prominent institutional logics, market and religion, fundamentally shape the patterns of commercial and public capital flows into microfinance organizations across developing nations. Results suggest that while a strong market logic encourages both commercial and public investments in microfinance, religious diversity deters commercial funding flows into MFOs. When a strong market logic and religious diversity coexist, both commercial and public capital flow is stunted. These findings have important implications for microfinance research and practices, the social entrepreneurship literature, and the institutional logics perspective. The contributions. Implications for microfinance research and practice. Scholars studying microfinance have mainly focused on the interface between microfinance organizations and end borrowers. Some studies have found microfinance is a powerful tool for business creation among the poor. It has income smoothing effect, allowing poor households to manage cash flows, deal with emergencies, and invest in the future. It is not a magic bullet like many believe it is most. effective when complemented by other supporting systems or programs like training and education. While these studies are useful in uncovering both the potential benefits and pitfalls of microfinance, the ultimate ability for microfinance to effectively combat poverty and gender inequality depends in large part on its ability to reach market where individuals who need capital can obtain it. Overcoming these challenges are essential for MFOs to reduce operating costs and become more financially appealing investment targets. The second implication is implication for social entrepreneurship research. The study seeks to add how recent developments in institutional theory, literature specifically, the development of the institutional logics perspective can enhance our understanding of social entrepreneurship. Going beyond the conceptualization of nation state cultures as unitary and subject to isomorphism, the institutional logics perspective provides an approach to nation state culture that appreciates how it is influenced by the dynamic interactions of various institutions' orders. Logics of the market and religion that are important for microfinance. Our study gives rise to an open question about what logics are most relevant in a specific context and whether multiple logics are complementary or compete. It also requires further study about how countries are able to overcome potential problems regarding or related to institutional complexity with regards to social entrepreneurship, international business, and institutional logics perspective. The third contribution implications of institutional logics perspective. Religion and market are intertwined, and the intersection of two introduces a unique type of institutional complexity that may have a huge impact on organizations. By directly theorizing and testing the logic of religion and its interaction with market logic, our study helps to expand the range of logics examined. It helps in extending the institutional complexity notion by introducing one untapped type of complexity at the intersection of religion and market. This study is among the first to extend the institutional logics and studies perspectives analytical focus from the field to a national level. The majority of studies have focused on how different institutional logics manifested at the field level shape individual and organizational cognition, identities and action. The institutional logics perspective points to the importance of attending to the interweaving of symbolic and material aspects of different institutional orders, other than materiality of economics and political institutions. The study has highlighted two different layers of institutional complexity: religious diversity and joint influence of market logic and religious logics. It shows value by applying a comparative institutional approach to social entrepreneurship by adopting the institutional logistics perspective. Limitation. The paper focuses on macro level variables, theorizes the effect of societal level institutional logics on organizational outcomes. It emphasizes on generality over detail. We infer rather than directly observe and test some of the mechanisms linking the market logic and religious diversity to MFO capital acquisition. Heterogeneity hasn't been fully captured, for instance. The distribution of religion might vary significantly across regions within the same nation, and thus different regions may face different levels of religious diversity, leading to operating challenges. To avoid that problem, more data should be collected within each nation. The paper limits itself to an amount of capital and focuses less on detailed terms of the loans acquired by MFOs for commercial and public sources. For instance, interest rates and the length of the loan are both signals reflecting funders' investment and degree to which they consider different types of MFOs as appealing. Collective efforts among scholars, microfinance practitioners, and policymakers are essential in compiling such information on an ongoing basis, thus leaving ample opportunities for future research. The paper proposes a comparative institutional approach rooted in the institutional logistics perspective to study of resource acquisition by social ventures. Attention was drawn to market and religious logics and the nature of different resource providers. We leverage insights from the contemporary institutional logics perspective and social entrepreneurship literature and applied them to the context of microfinance in developing countries. We showed how cross fertilization of these scholarly areas can be productive in studying how institutional processes fundamentally shape the nature of capital acquisition to addressing pressing social problems. Such integration was also helpful in revealing the various enabling and constraining forces that social ventures face in the pursuit of both financial and social goals. Overall, the approach has the potential to provide policymakers as well as social entrepreneurs with insights on how the institutional embeddedness of social ventures matters and help them better understand the various factors that facilitate or inhibit the creation and performance of those ventures in different national settings. Microfinance refers to the financial services provided to low income people. The applicability of microfinance for social capital formation can be seen in Canada in terms of empowerment of South Asian skilled immigrant women among various other groups. Immigrant women are more likely to face barriers due to the intersection of several factors, including gender, race, cultural determinants. In order to provide information, knowledge, and skills that these immigrant needs to function self-sufficiently in their new home country, there are government, both federal and provincial funded settlement services. In large cities such as Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, apart from government funded programs, there are hundreds of organizations and groups with multi-million dollar budgets that provide a wide range of services to immigrants. Microfinance has the capacity to strengthen the existing programs with the new capital and new ideas for effective social and economical integration.